There's a lot of good writing advice out there, and maybe it's in books, like in The Story Grid by Sean Coyne, one of the books that ended up really having kind of an impact on the way that I considered story. You can check out that book for more intermediate writing tips. Maybe you find great writing advice on Brandon Sanderson's YouTube channel and his college-level courses that he posts online for free. Maybe it's the blog of an author. Maybe it's a killer podcast on writing. Hi, how are you? But unfortunately, bad writing advice is even more plentiful. Today, we look at a Reddit post on the worst writing advice that people have come across. Even better, we're fixing that advice so you can actually use it. Welcome to the Writing Theory Podcast, a podcast for every level of writer. Everything that we discuss here on this podcast is about pushing you to the next level of storytelling. From prose to structure to the business of writing, you can join me every Monday for a new episode, a new topic, and a new takeaway that you can apply to your writing right away. I'm Carson Long. Let's get started. Good morning, Vietnam! How crazy would that be if you were actually in Vietnam and listening to this podcast and heard me say that? You know, I feel like there's a 0.1% chance I can drop a line like that every single episode and someone's going to be like, dang, he knows where I'm at. Maybe not. Writing advice is a dime a dozen, I think is the saying. Like, you cannot scroll down a writing-focused page, whether it's Reddit, whether it's YouTube comments, whether it's our Discord, which you should totally come join, without being bombarded by someone telling you that you're doing it wrong. And who should tell you that but the guy who has made 2 different media platforms all about telling you how you can improve your writing? But I do it out of love, positivity, fun. It's all good-natured. Our monthly Reddit deep dive takes us today to a post simply titled, Worst Piece of Writing Advice You've Ever Gotten? Along with the text of the post that reads thusly. What's the worst piece of writing advice you've ever received? I once got a tip that you should always consider your novel better than everyone else's, including published novels, to exert your superiority. And this is garbage advice because 1, if we think we're better than every other author, we can't learn from their works. And 2, you won't be able to edit and improve your work if you're already convinced it's the best. Just really overall impractical. And you know what? Gotta agree. I mean, but that's not the juicy stuff, of course. They always say, you know, the real gold is down in the comments below. The stuff we're after is that gold. What is the worst writing advice you have received? I think a lot of us will probably have some of the same kind of advice because it's like the commonly reiterated kind of advice that's so tired and old. Like, of course, we've heard it before. It brings nothing new to the conversation. That's pretty bad advice. But then there's also just bad writing advice like, think your book is better than everyone else's. I don't really know what benefit that's supposed to bring to the author. But hey, you know what? I don't think it's the worst writing advice I've heard. But I imagine my bar for good versus bad writing advice and what I've considered to be the worst writing advice might change by the end of this episode. So why don't we go to those comments and look at the top comment. The number 1 most upvoted bad advice is write exactly 2,000 words for every chapter. Ah, the best-selling novel formula. We see you again. How do you feel about this advice? Right? This Sean Coyne, which I mentioned in the intro here, he also talks about this in his book. And in my video that I did on chapters, link in the show notes, I spend a good amount of time diving into this idea, the 2,000 word chapter. Why do people recommend 2,000 words? Why is it so regurgitated? And does it even matter? right? I think a common sentiment we're going to uncover through the next comments is write however many words are needed in the chapter. In my chapter video, I spent a good amount of time. I think I grabbed 5 books of 5 different genres, cracked them open to 2 random chapters, and recorded the word count. That's a really good video. You should check it out. So first off, before we get into all the responses to this, is this bad advice? What do you think? You have 7 seconds to make your case. Go. Yeah. True. Well, all right. You know what? That's a pretty good point. And before I give my own thoughts, here are some of those top comments. First comment that responds to this says, this is from the original poster, and this person was just gung-ho about like laying into all this bad writing advice. They say, 2,000 word chapters, exactly 2,000? What if the sentence doesn't end at 2,000 words? Can you not finish it? Whoever gave this advice didn't think it through. Come on, you're better than that. This is a very bad, okay. I like doing these Reddit responses, but one of the most difficult parts about it is not turning every comment into like a snarky straw man argument. But you can see where I'm coming from here. They are doing that themselves. This does not add to the conversation. Yes, here, you know what? Let's go ahead and get ahead of this. If you are writing a chapter and you are targeting 2,000 words, you are allowed, and I, Carson Long, the creator of writing theory, am giving you this pass. You are allowed to end that chapter before 2,000 words or after 2,000 words. I'll give you the wiggle room of 10 words in either direction. If this is how you want to take the advice, you can write up to 2,010 words. That being said, don't take that advice. That's put on your critical thinking hat, right? Someone else says, are my chapters too long because they are like 2 to 3 times that length? How long are your chapters? Do you even consider word count when you are writing? And also, is this even something to consider in the drafting stage, or is this something that you edit your book down into? For example, if you do want to follow this bestseller formula, and we're about to talk about that next here, if you want to follow that formula, maybe that's something you edit your book into, as opposed to sitting down and saying, I have 2,000 words to tell my story in this chapter, and then 2,000 words to tell my story in the next chapter. You're going to be editing your book a dozen times. You have plenty of time to identify the core themes and the important things from that chapter. And if you're shooting for 2,000 words, get that chapter down to 2,000 words or bump it up. Who's to say you're not underwriting? And my thoughts on this are, honestly, like, first off, I expected like a way better discussion about this advice in the comments, but everyone was like, 2,000 words, that's not enough. What if you wanted to write more? Look, this is not bad advice. Are you kidding me? Let's fix this advice. Let's change it just a bit. Every chapter being exactly 2,000 words is confirmed bad advice, but only because you chose to phrase it that way. Let me rephrase it. Here is the good advice version of this. If you are following the bestseller formula, your chapters should be an average of 2,000 words. Now, what do I mean by that? So the story grid calls it potato chip chapters. Short enough to be digestible and recommended for that length, so it's easy for a reader to convince themselves to read just one more chapter before bed. That's how Sean Coyne sort of phrases it. And Sean Coyne is an editor editing books for this general pulp fiction, mass market kind of story. And they want that addictive, flip to the next chapter, one more chapter before bed type of reading experience. Do all books follow this? Of course not. Just pick up a book and read it, and you'll be like, hey, this isn't a 2,000 word chapter. If all you're reading are the James Pattersons and the John Grishams and the, who's another pulp fiction bestseller? Even Sarah J. Maas does this, right? This is like, if you are targeting general audience and you're trying to work with a traditional publishing house, they're probably going to try to edit your story into these kind of bite-sized chapters. Do all genres follow this? No, they don't. Do all bestsellers, those books on the best-selling of bookshelves at the bookstore, follow this? No, they don't. Brandon Sanderson's on there, and he's not writing 2,000-word chapters. Epic fantasy, very different expectations than the bestseller formula. Now, 2,000 words, like a 2,000-word chapter, equals roughly like 8 to 12 minutes of reading, depending on your speed. This is not reading it out loud. This is just reading it in your head. And that's why the 2,000-word chapter is like a good sort of target. That's not a huge time sink. You can read that while you're waiting in line at the pharmacy. In my chapters video, I looked at 5 different books ranging from epic fantasy to romance to romantasy to pulp fiction. And besides my big epic fantasy example, Malazan Book of the Fallen, coming in with 9,000 word chapters and 12,000 word chapters, every other book ranged between 1,500 words and 2,500 words per chapter. And these were just random chapters that I picked out. I think I picked chapters 8 and 9 of every book. It was easy for me to I didn't have to flip through the whole book to find them, right? So what does this tell us, the authors, right? If you are hoping to work with a publisher of these general audience, these GA releases, and when they're targeting bestseller lists and those mass market kind of books, then your publisher will likely want you to edit your work into these types of chapters. But let's make things clear, especially when you're drafting, don't sacrifice storytelling to try to achieve these chapters. This is something you can edit towards. And if your goal isn't to sell a manuscript to a publisher, don't beholden yourselves to these guidelines if you don't want to. Self-publishing exists so that you can represent your story how you want to. One response to this comment is, chapter lengths need to be as long as they need to be, which is then followed by another comment saying Robert Jordan, the author of Wheel of Time, has a couple 100-page chapters in his books. Followed by another comment that says, this is why I couldn't read The Wheel of Time. This is proving the point of the feedback, the advice in the dang comments. You just proved yourself why this is good writing advice. Here is a better version of this writing advice. If you are targeting a market that expects the bestseller formula, edit your story into 2,000-word chapters on average. Use outliers to this number for emphasis. The climax of your story or big revelations or big character moments can stand out more if you write those moments as short or longer chapters. Now it feels different. Now your reader is giving emphasis to those kind of moments when the chapter is much longer or when a chapter is much shorter. Just like how we like to use different lengths of sentence structure for emphasis and for I sound like a country boy, and for for emphasis and for, just like a refreshing change of pace. You can do that with your chapters too. What are your thoughts on that? Let's go to the next piece of writing advice. Our next piece of writing advice starts out with, quote, to just use ChatGPT if I had writer's block. Edit. Not just use AI to help me brainstorm or correct grammar, but to literally do the writing for me. Firstly, that's not writing. Secondly, because of the way large language models are trained, any writing the AI generates for you has been taken from copyrighted material without the owner's consent, so it's theft. And thirdly, generative AI doesn't make you a better writer. The only way to do that is by reading widely and writing often. Not by pawning off the hard work and self-development that makes creative writing worthwhile to a machine that not only steals, but negatively affects the environment. Oh, AI, we meet again. Another lovely, non-polarizing, calm, level-headed discussion about AI in writing. We all know this is what we needed. Another conversation that's going to break the mold and forge new boundaries for how we understand AI in creative writing. Oh, I can't wait. So let's get some baseline things out of the way. AI is a tool. Using a tool incorrectly will likely have bad results. Not using a certain tool can still lead to you creating a great final product. And not being open to using a tool might mean that your final product comes along slower or in a different way than using a tool. Does that make sense? Use the right tool for the job, and your right tool may be different from someone else's. Like, for example, so far I've discovered that the right tool, this is going to be a tough one to say, the right tool for writing for me is Scrivener, because I can organize my files in a way that makes sense to me. But someone else might say, I love Obsidian, or I love Microsoft Word, or I love Bibisco, I think is another one. That's the right tool for the job for them. And then for me, editing, the right tool for the job so far that I've discovered has been ProWritingAid. But to someone else, it may be Grammarly. To someone else, it may be ChatGPT. Use the right tool for the job, right? Let's look at some of our very level-headed and calm responses in the comments. I'm running out of ways to politely say I'd rather stop writing forever than use ChatGPT when Tech Bros suggested. It's just analyzing your style and building on it using predictive text. It's still your work. If you think that way, you're not only not a writer, you also fundamentally misunderstand art. I don't think, look, as someone who's been in tech for a decade in like software companies, I don't think I jive with the predictive text angle. I don't really think that's right. And look, I think that there are some things that AI is good at, and generating creative storytelling is not yet one of those things. And yet, there are people who are able to get the best results from AI because they're experts in like crafting prompts and instructions for the AI to use. So maybe some people can get AI to spit out like a, convincing storytelling chunk, section, chapter, story. I can't. That is not me. I have not spent enough time trying to achieve this thing. Replies to this comment begin the conversation on when is it appropriate to use AI in other aspects of writing, like editing for grammar or spelling or sentence structure, which most writers seem to begrudgingly say, okay, well, that's okay, as long as AI isn't writing for you, and then they go off on a tangent about AI writing for you, right? A lot of these comments are just kind of spinning your wheels. Look, we've been using, AI, algorithms, machine learning, all of these phrases kind of are relating to the same thing. We've been using this for spell checker and grammar in Microsoft Word since as long as I've been working in Microsoft. I don't think I've ever been in a word processor that didn't have the red or green squiggly line underneath. That's looking at the context of your words and being like, okay, based on the placement of the keys of the keyboard, what word did they mean to type? Let me give a bunch of suggestions that also match the context of the sentence. This is all complex stuff. This is all AI trying to help you write. This has been around forever, right? Now we have generative AI that goes a little bit further. Here are some of the things that people say it's okay to use AI for in the comments. Someone says that they use AI for world building. They dump a bunch of context about their work into AI, and they prompt it to ask critical questions about the people and the places and the lore, etc. But, they don't let the AI write the story for them. And that's a cool use. I heard someone else in one of my early videos comment and said that they use Claude, which is another large language model, for creating the language of their fantasy novel. And so they have come up with a set number of rules, and then they've used AI to further extrapolate out more language rules for this, and then have used that AI to learn the language. Like the AI is familiar with all of these rules about language, and then they can be like, translate this sentence into our now newly constructed language and spit it back out to me, and I can use it in my novel. And I'm not sitting there like Tolkien, like drawing out the runes and figuring out which letter's supposed to be the ah sound. What do you think about that? I think that's kind of a cool use. But I'm also someone who's not really passionate about languages, constructed languages. Another comment asks ChatGPT to give them ideas, but they'll brainstorm their own ideas and ask for feedback too. But they would never let AI write those ideas. This is kind of the core for this is where I think most writers start to feel weird, right? I don't think that writing off of a prompt is any less creative than sitting down and writing. Because even I think all writing is considering some prompts and being like, this will make a good story. I'm going to extrapolate the details on this and write it. And that prompt in your head may be like, I want to write Princess Bride, but with a female protagonist who is not just there waiting around to be saved. And then we get Tress in the Emerald Sea. Or you're like Stephen King and you're like, I read this Time magazine article that's about telekinesis. And then I read this other Time magazine article about teenage bullying. And then you're like, I'm going to use those two ideas as prompts to write Carrie. And then that's your breakout hit. And then you write for 60 more years. That dude is so crazy. Someone else says AI can be good for proofreading or bouncing ideas off of, but God knows it would be terrible to let it write for you. This is what I'm saying is like, this is a tired conversation. I think if you have an idea for where you draw the line in the sand, that's based on so much of your own internal sort of understanding and appreciation of writing, it's never really going to be moved. So this is kind of where I check out of the conversation. And I'll give you my thoughts. You can consider these, whether you agree or don't agree. You can poke holes in them. My thoughts now in the current moment, because of how tired I feel this conversation is whatever. Use AI if you want. Use any tool out there in the world that helps you bring your vision to life. Create the best story and characters and setting that you can. Hell, ask AI to take your brain dump of what should happen in your story and your character ideas and your arcs and put them into a plot framework. Why not? If you want to use a tool, then use it. Take that plot framework, go write your story, have a blast. Bring your vision to life. I don't know. I don't care anymore. If AI writing makes it into your final product, disclose it if the audience and platform expect it. I'm honestly just checking out of the conversation because it doesn't ever go anywhere and no one will ever change their mind. So there. Maybe I'll do one final big video with hot takes and hot opinions at some point in the future. I've been sitting on a script for a while that basically says whether you like it or not, people are going to be using AI in writing. Whether it's brainstorming, whether it's world building, whether it's putting ideas into a plot framework, whether it's writing the actual story, maybe the best thing to do at this point is just to create a space for it for people who want to have AI enhanced writing, I guess maybe we could say. Go post it over there. The audience that wants that story can find it over there. And then that way it's not mixed in with our purely human created works. Everyone ideally is happy. We have a place for everyone to live. Maybe that's the move. I've been sitting on a script like that, but also I realize no one's going to change their mind. So like, what's the point of the video? Let me know what your thoughts are on that. Here's another piece of bad writing advice that we get in the comments. It says, quote, that I should change the gender of my protagonist because he was very perceptive and men usually aren't. Look, that is what I'm talking about. That's hilarious advice. First off, whoever gave that as serious writing advice, is this person's writing group like a troupe of stand-up comedians from the early 2000s? Because that would have slayed. That would have slayed back then. There's no good comments or way to spin this. I just thought it was funny and I wanted to share it. All right, next one. Everybody has a story and you should like interview people and then write about their stories. Like, not only is that the most bland and general idea ever, but this person talked about it like it was a completely unheard of and unique premise. Actually, anyone who tells you about what to write about, it gets under my skin. It's like people find out you write and suddenly they want you to make their great novel idea a reality. Hey, some people make great livings that way. By the way, if you don't know, this is ghostwriting. This is what ghostwriting is. Ghostwriting is when you are someone who can write and someone who either doesn't have the time or the technical skill, but still wants to create a book, will hire you to write it for them. And then I've done this before. I've been a ghostwriter. When you are a writer and you are struggling to make a living, this is one way that you can get practice in crafting a story so that you can be better prepared to do that for your own story. I used this ghostwriting opportunity to explore some of the more technical details of Scrivener, of getting more familiar with the process of exporting stuff out of Scrivener into the proper format for publishing. And I even used this opportunity to look at all of the publishing options that Amazon has and kind of get a better idea for how I'm going to do this in my own work in the future. And I did all of that while getting paid. So, first off, this is not a bad thing. Being a ghostwriter can be a very lucrative career. That being said, let's actually look at what they mean, because they don't mean anything about ghostwriting. So their idea is like, everyone has a story. And I don't know if the advice really is meant to target like one of two different things. Like, I take this advice in two ways. And the first is really not the way that OP took it. I take this advice as encouragement that you have a unique way to tell a story that you want to tell. Do you want to tell a romantasy about dragon riders and dark brooding boys in rebellion? Do it. You have a story to tell. It doesn't matter if you want to tell a story of a particular genre or trope or existing structure, you will tell it in your own style. Everyone has a story. That's kind of the first way that I took it. But the other way is like, this is almost like the nonfiction approach. Hey, people are interesting. Find an interesting person and tell their story. Now, personally, I'm not a nonfiction writer and I don't really strive to be. So to me, that advice is a little meh. I'm not jonesing with it. I'm sure nonfiction writers are like, that's my bread and butter. Let me interview you and write your memoir and I'll be your ghostwriter. Boom, nailed it. Now, the comments in here is like, here, the first comment says, everyone has a story. Then go tell it then. Mine has an airship, so it's better. No feedback, 10 out of 10 comment. Love it. Next one. Exactly. I also can't stand people who ask others for novel ideas. The whole point is that you're supposed to come up with that story yourself. Okay, well, like, fair, but also there's nothing wrong with writing a story off of a prompt. There's a subreddit that used to be pretty popular that was just a writing prompt a day. And so you go to that writing prompt subreddit and it'd be like a conversation between God and the devil over the soul of a dog. And you would write like 1,000-word story in the comments using that prompt. And people would upvote the ones that they liked best. So like, what's the deal here? But also, I have to say, we should be fair and also acknowledge that this question might come from a place of insecurity, right? What are your novel ideas like? Maybe mine aren't as good as other people's. Imposter syndrome. I could never come up with an idea like Mistborn. Like, oh, what kind of novel ideas do you have? Or just like the need to know how other people think. That's a valuable thing. Also, again, tons of people are writing from prompts. And basically, you coming up with an idea is you coming up with a prompt that you really like. And it can vary in levels of detail. And then you extrapolate that and then you write the story. I don't know. No harm in asking others. I don't think this is like bad advice or anything. Our next piece of bad writing advice, this one's a little spicier, says, I was once told you have to get the reader interested in the first sentence. Otherwise, your book will fail. Color me surprised when they then tried to sell a course on writing the perfect starter sentence. Look, terrible. Terrible. Look, you gotta watch out for these damn fiends out here trying to take advantage of your love for the craft, these dirt bags. Make sure to rate the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And check out my website for book coaching and developmental editing services. This is Writing Theory. Let's talk about openings, though, because there is a good conversation to be had about the openings of your novel. Because I think when I was being educated on writing, and again, this is like these big, chunky 700-page literary textbooks that they made us carry around in high school, where it had all of these excerpts from all of these famous works and short stories and whatever in there. There was a huge importance on the first paragraph of a story, the first sentence, the first page, whatever it might be. And of course, there's merit to being able to write a great opening. But also, people know that books are long. People know this. I mean, how many pages do you give a book before you would choose to DNF it, to do not finish it? Did not finish it, past tense? that's also going to be different for everyone. And look, we're in a golden age of content. You should not be afraid to DNF a book. There's too many books you will never be able to read all the ones that you want to read. Don't waste your time on a book you're not jiving with. It may be the fact that you're reading it at the wrong time. Life is busy in all these other different ways. You can't give it the attention it deserves, even though it's a good book. It may be that you thought it was going to be really impactful for you. Maybe it was recommended by a ton of people on Book Talk, but it's just like not your style. Choose to DNF it. That's okay. There is merit to having a great opening of your story. But I don't know a single person who puts down a book because they weren't hooked in the first paragraph. We don't have that short attention spans. If you're reading, you know that this is a marathon, not a sprint. But I do know people who choose to read a book because they were hooked on that first section, right? That's the glory of a strong opening to a book. If you can master the introduction, the hook, you will be a successful writer. That is a skill that you can develop that can set you out from so many other books and will especially help you get your foot in the door to traditional publishing. That's a skill you can develop. It requires a huge understanding of story and presenting information to the reader and just knowing how it will make the reader feel, right? If you can introduce questions that the reader wants answers to in the first page, that's a phenomenal thing to be able to add to your story. Like I will choose to DNF a book only after I've gotten 10 to 20% in. If it's a 100,000 word book, I'm not going to give up on it until I'm at least 10 to 20,000 words in. If it takes more than 10% of your entire story to make me invested, that's when I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not going to be finishing this book. But like first page, first paragraph, first sentence, that's all garbage advice to me. This is just an additional skill you can develop. This is not a skill that every writer needs to have in order to write. Tell me I'm wrong in the comments. Finally, in the top comments is a long comment that is basically about success is all luck. And I'll summarize the important bits. This is writing advice that's been given in a lot of writing groups, and it's probably the worst advice of all. Success is all luck. When the poster of this comment started in their past to start taking writing seriously, investing in things like developmental editors, studying the market, and writing consistently, the feedback that they started to get on the writing went from meh to oh, wow, okay, this is interesting. And then after more revisions of their story, the feedback started to become more of we want more of this. And now they look at the writing of other writers at that meh level, and they understand better the reason that those writers are complaining about failure. In reality, they get criticism for these common things. Either the writing isn't polished, there's no hook to the story, it's bad marketing, aka I'm going to write a romance book, but it's going to have a slow build up that takes 10,000 pages. 10,000 words to get to the good stuff. That would be bad marketing. If you say it's a romance book, there's genre expectations. You're not delivering on those expectations. Or the story isn't immersive or good, or it's an overcrowded market. This was a long comment. It was a lot of stuff. That's the best I could distill it down to. What do you think about this comment? This poster talks about doing a market study every single day. I've never heard of this. No one else in the comments had ever heard of doing a market study. I think this person made up this information. I mean, not the information, but the term. They say that every day, first off, they clarify that they write for a video game. And every day they do a market study. And a market study is that they join different fandoms, they engage with different communities, and they're analyzing trends of successes and failures. I don't know how I feel about this. I have a hard time thinking that, first off, doing a market study every single day, this sounds like you are trying to find information to quickly change and turn something around, to react to trends. But in the reality is we're in the world of writing. There's not really a way to quickly turn around and capitalize on a trend. I mean, it takes time to write a book. A market study in whatever this person's calling this market study in writing seems really hard to just nail down. because the market might change between when you study it and when you finally can create something for that market. If you looked at the market right now and saw that romantasy was at its peak and you wanted to write a romantasy, it might take you, if you're self-publishing, a couple months. For most people, there are people who are able to just get a book out there super fast. And to those people, they're going to be successful. That is a marketable skill. But for most of us, bare minimum, it's going to take you a couple months. And if you're traditionally publishing, it could take you up to 2 years to bring that book to market because traditional publishing moves a lot slower. That being said, should you keep an eye on trends in the writing space? Yeah, why would you not? Especially because you're likely a reader as well. And so you're just going to be exposed to those trends. There are resources that you can get that are targeted for agents, that are studies by publishing houses that are targeted for writers who are writing to market, that do try to predict what's going to be popular, what readers are going to want in the next couple years. You can find those resources online. They're typically these kind of like marketing case studies that you have to purchase, but they're out there. You can choose to write to market. Not everyone's going to, especially if you're in here for the love of the craft. You're not likely going to be like, historical fiction is about to make a comeback. I could write a historical fiction. But the benefit is, if you look at the market and it says historical fiction is about to make a comeback, and you already love to write historical fictions, this may be the moment for you to try to capitalize on it. Okay, but anyways, back to success is all luck. What do you think about that phrase? Because I got 2 key points to make. Number 1, success doesn't look the same to every person. For some people, success might be getting your book on the shelf at the bookstore. That's success. For other people, maybe that's not enough. Maybe that's too achievable. And success is commercial success, becoming a New York Times bestseller. To other people, success is writing the story you've always wanted to tell. Success is getting that first review on your book where someone says, I loved these characters. That's success. Success looks different to everyone. And if your idea of success is traditional publishing, and very much if your idea is commercial success following that release, that is very much so luck. You have to have a story that matches the trends, that gets into the hands of the right agent, who gets that book into the hands of the right editor. And then you have to get an offer, and then you have to trust that the publisher can help you bring that book to the level it needs to be. That being said, and this is something you'll notice in anywhere in the world, those who tend to be lucky tend to also be skilled and to work hard. There's a lot of people who are lucky with the opportunities that come up to them. But more so, you'll see people who are able to capitalize on those opportunities and achieve success because they were prepared to do it, because they had figured out their writing routine, how to churn out words of high quality. They had figured out how to create a compelling character journey. They had done the work to have all of these skills that is, of course, needed to write a successful book. And then the lucky opportunity came. You can still be a fantastic writer creating great stories and just never get that story to the right people. But also, you don't have to. That doesn't have to be your end goal. Success is all luck. I don't think that's bad advice. I think that is bad advice if you use that to then convince yourself not to try to achieve what you consider to be success. That would then be bad advice. But now that's on you. That's on you to figure out, does that kill your ambition, or does that make you want to be prepared for when that luck comes around? All right, let's get controversial. So we've been looking at all the top comments. These are all the top bad writing advice that people, are upvoting. But let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to the fights that are happening in the comments. The top bad writing advice in this controversial filter is show, don't tell is bad. And then a bunch of people saying, yes, it's bad, but it's also good. And yet no one is saying anything that you haven't already heard before. Show, don't tell is good because writers need that direction. But also, show, don't tell is bad because it was never meant for us that write prose. It was originally meant for screenplays. The eternal argument. Where do you stand? Is show, don't tell good or bad? Does it change based on how you interpret it? Of course it does. Okay, here's another one. Here's a good one. The bad writing advice is write every day. Now, the OP, person who commented this, says that this is just a recipe for burnout. That you hear this advice a lot. Even people like Stephen King and On Writing, which is maybe the first writing book that a lot of people will read, will say, I sit down every day and I write, 2,000 words, or I write however many pages. I think he says 6 pages or something like that. And then everyone reading that book who is inspired to be a writer, learning from the most successful writer of like our generation, would be like, all right, that's the way. That's how he churns out so much content, which is not incorrect. But I do think the OP kind of makes a good point here. That could lead to burnout for a lot of people. And especially if you think this is the way it needs to be done and you miss that one day, knocks you off your routine, you get sick for a week, you go on family vacation, that I need to write every single day routine gets broken, all of a sudden you can't get back into it and you never write again. A tale as old as time. It's happened to me too. The idea that like I'm in the zone, I'm writing every day, I'm getting sometimes 5,000 words a day, sometimes 2,000 words a day, sometimes 1,500 words a day, but I'm in the zone and I am writing. And then life happens. And we talked about this in our writing routines video or podcast. Yeah, back in episode 1. I think this is bad advice. If you consider that this is the only way to do it, you have to write every single day. I think that you get enormous benefits from being so immersed in your story for writing every single day, returning to those characters, knowing very clearly where the story needs to go. I just recently returned to a story that I'm writing, and I sat down for the first time in a month, and I had to be like, where the hell was I going with this? And I had to read the past couple chapters, kind of like figure out my notes and the plot framework, be like, okay, I think I know what needs to happen next. But when I was writing every single day, that was never a question. It was top of mind, as they say in the tech world. Top of mind. Maybe you don't write every day. If so, write every day is bad advice. But I don't necessarily think it's bad overall. If you can write every day, you will be that much more prolific and you will be that much more involved in your story. That's a great thing. But maybe, there's this idea of the binge writer. I don't know if you've heard about this. People who will be like, I'm going to just take notes on my novel, and then I'm going to go disappear in a cabin in the woods for 2 weeks, and I'm going to come out with a fully done book. Some people operate like that. They don't need to write every day. They need to prepare, figure out their story, and then just dedicate the time to go in and write. I've done things like that before. I don't know how, but one time I convinced my wife to let me go spend the night in a hotel room, and I Uber Eated food in, and I wrote like 7,000 words. Bless her heart. And I felt very, satisfied that I was like able to dedicate the time. It felt like maybe this is how I needed to operate. Do that for 2 weeks, and you've got a 100,000 word book or something like that. I don't know. I didn't do the math. Maybe you're not a binge writer though. Maybe you just need to touch your story every single day and it slowly gets there. And I think that's how most writers operate. And it's also way more realistic when you have other obligations, but also give yourself some lenience. We talked all about this. I won't talk your ear off. But in our big thread, our big Reddit thread of bad writing advice, those are the gems. I would love to know your thoughts on what's the worst writing advice you've received. And is there a way to spin that into a positive way, or is it just flat out bad? If you have any flat out bad writing advice, I want to know about it. But it's got to be real writing advice. It can't be like light your first manuscript on fire because it was bad the whole time, and dedicate it to empowering yourself to absorb the energy to give to your next manuscript. Don't do that. That would probably be bad writing advice. I want real writing advice. Let me know. How do you like these Reddit episodes? I just think there's kind of fun discussion. I would never think in a million years to say half the things that these people on Reddit say. So it's kind of fun to be able to bring those to you guys. If you enjoy these Reddit-focused episodes, let me know. Rate the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, because we also have all kinds of other great content in video form. The podcast is still evolving. Your feedback kind of helps me better shape what you want. And that's exciting for me because that's kind of what happened to the YouTube channel as well. And I'm really happy with the community that we've developed. Thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I'm Carson Long. I'll see you next Monday.